So you have a thriving ELT business and are looking to understand how to scale. Maybe you're just starting out on your entrepreneurial journey and you need to get absolute clarity in what you do and how it helps others so that you can live the life you want. Regardless of where you are on your entrepreneurial journey, you will need support, accountability, and encouragement along the way. So imagine if you could join a mastermind that would give you such support, encouragement, focus, and business knowledge from experts on branding, mindset, and marketing, and so much more. And all for less than $50 per month. Why not book a call with me today so you can start taking actions on your goals? The link is in the description. Hi everyone, welcome to Season 3, Episode 16 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's guest is Lindsay McMahon. Lindsay is an educational technology entrepreneur in the field of ESL, as well as a teacher who strives to help clients reach their communication goals. As the producer and co-host of the award-winning All Ears English podcast, Lindsay has built a digital brand that inspires students worldwide and has acquired more than 200 million downloads since launch. Lindsay is the CEO of All Ears English, a fast-growing ESL brand that inspires adult English learners to focus on connection through English by providing general English training and IELTS test preparation. And that's not all that Lindsay does or is involved in. I had a great chat with Lindsay about podcasting, her business. There's some really great takeaways for people who may want to use podcasting as a tool to grow their business.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Okay, welcome back everybody to the latest episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. I think we're over 40 episodes now. You'll probably know when you listen to the intro. And I'm really delighted and pumped and ecstatic today to have our latest guest, Lindsay McMahon from All Ears English. She's the founder and CEO of All Ears English. Good morning, good evening, Lindsay.
Good morning, Philip. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here.
And it's a real delight for me. As I said to you prior to hitting record, I was introduced to you by Herbert Gerzer, who we've had as a podcast guest, and Herbert is a specialist in getting students for schools, especially through Facebook marketing. How do you know Herbert? Have you worked with him?
I have. Yeah, I've been working with Herbert for the last 9 months or so, working on some paid ads campaigns and, just understanding what works in this moving and shaking world of online ESL. It's changing a lot, right? So we have to be ready to pivot and move and change. And so he and I have been working together on those things.
Fantastic. And let's have we're going to plug Herbert's great work, but what have you seen in the past 9 months with Herbert? How has your business changed? What's the effect?
Yeah, sure. It's going well. I mean, we're always learning. We're trying different things. We're finding that as Facebook is not doing the same kind of targeting it used to be able to do, we have to pivot around that, but we've been able to kind of work with it and develop new strategies, right? To understand how to use retargeting properly, how to use Google ads properly, and how to tie in Facebook and other top of the funnel lead magnets from there, and just to constantly kind of reinvent it. So it's an ongoing challenge, but we've seen a little bit of traction here and there. So absolutely. Yes.
Great. And some of which I talked to Herbert about on the podcast was of course, with Apple, iOS, and sometimes Facebook is not appearing on Apple devices. Also, the interface has changed as well, isn't it? The targeting, the Facebook ads interface is completely different, isn't it now? How can you talk me through that? How Facebook advertising was in the past and what the changes are?
So I generally tend to work with contractors like Herbert to run my Facebook ads for me. So this is a good, tip for your audience. When you're running a business, you don't have time to go and run all the channels, right? So my recommendation is choose a channel you love. For me, that's podcasting. And do that, right? You show your creativity in one place. If you're a super analytical person, run those Facebook ads, but that is not for me. So, that's not my expertise. And so Herbert helps me with that. Other contractors help me with that. I mean, I know that, as soon as Apple started asking people if they want to be tracked, obviously, something like 80 or 90% said no, which makes total sense. I said no too.
Me too.
On the other end, right, we're seeing changes. And so we have to be able to pivot around it. So in terms of how the interface has changed, I couldn't tell you, but we're just trying to move with Facebook at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember those notices coming up and then the plaintive cry from Mark Zuckerberg, oh my God, our ads are not displaying on Apple. I felt sorry for a split second.
I mean, it just speaks to the point of when you have a business, you're running a business, you have to diversify your risk, right? Imagine if someone was running their business 100% on Facebook, and there were people that were doing that. I mean, they would be 100% down right now. You have to have your leads coming from different places, especially email, right? I mean, email is the most important thing. You're always driving them to your email list, but podcasting, YouTube, apps, Facebook, Google AdWords. We experimented with Clubhouse this year, which was interesting. Always trying new things, but you got to diversify.
Yeah, there's diversifying, but then there's overload, isn't there? It's trying to find the balance. I know maybe we're sort of the same. I'm the type of person who tends to go for the shiny new things and try this and maybe go forward 1 inch and then try another thing and this doesn't work and give up. And, that's a fault in itself. But as you say, some people don't diversify. They put all their eggs in one basket, maybe rely on business, whether that be through blog posts or Facebook, and then that can go wrong. So how do you strike that balance?
Oh, it's the question I ask myself every day, Philip. I have the same problem as you, right? The shiny object syndrome. What I try to do, and this is where my team helps me a lot. So every quarter or every year, we do set our huge rock goal, like the rocks, the big things, 2 or 3 things we really know will move the business forward. And I announce that to them, right? So that's very public. It's a public accountability, right? So if I come the next quarter, I say, oh, now these are our big rocks. That's not going to build trust with my team. So that's one thing. And they're going to notice if we're veering off to this other thing, the shiny object that just appeared halfway through the year, that wasn't our goal. So that's one thing you can do is say your goals out loud. You can write them down and just make sure you understand that things you're doing, you're spending your time on are truly moving the needle forward. Ask yourself that question every day. It's so easy to fall into the trap of going down rabbit holes. There's like a million of them. And every day it's a test, right? And so like writing them down, having them on your wall and saying, is this serving the goal? Is this really moving the business forward? If not, try to delegate it or just don't do it. Just wait and see if it really needs to be done,
Okay, so try something new, but measure it and see what the outcome is. If it's not coming through, if it's not aligning with your goals, if it's not producing what you want in short, medium, long term, shelve it or ditch it.
Yeah. And don't try like 10 new things at one time, right? Because then how are you going to measure what actually worked?
Exactly.
How are you going to know where you got that traction from? Try, in a more methodical way. And I feel like to bring a business to a next level, you have to be analytical or you have to have analytical people on your team. I think that's a real challenge in this world because we're teachers. I'm a teacher at heart. I'm not analytical, but I've had to become that way or I have to find people who are. Like Herbert, for example, is a great fill in there to help me because he is analytical. So hiring for those skills, that way of thinking is so key.
Exactly. Yeah. It kind of reminds me living here in Japan, the Japanese, sometimes the well, I'm generalizing here, of course, foreigners, but let's say you're sometimes in Europe and America, we tend to do things on a whim more often, and we change our minds. In business, maybe we might make decisions more quickly, but then we might change them quickly as well.
Okay.
Whereas, Japanese deliberate over things. They take a long time to make decisions. But once that decision is made, it's very hard to dislodge that and replace it with something else. So the typical example is, there's a meetup group of Japanese and foreigners, and they're in Tokyo, and they decide beforehand to go to a sushi restaurant, but then somebody says, actually, we could go to a curry restaurant, and the Japanese go crazy. They're like, oh, no, we agreed the sushi restaurant. So it's kind of getting marrying the two or finding the golden mean there.
Yeah, I think you can find a balance. And I feel like that just comes with years of learning, of finding what is your tendency, what is your team there for to help you do, right? It's all about that learning. Yeah, so true. I lived in Japan for a while too, Philip, actually. So I kind of know what you're talking about. It's quite a different culture.
Yes, exactly. But I've learned that as well, having a Japanese wife. It's like, we said we're going to the movies on Sunday. We're not going to change our mind, I'm just completely conditioned now. So, I've turned Japanese.
That.
But tell me a little bit, just going back, how it all started, Lindsay. Where are you from originally? And you started out as a teacher. Can you?
Yes. Yeah, of course. So let's see, all ears English. So after college, I lived in Japan, spent 1.5 years in Tokyo, the Tokyo area. I traveled through South America. So I had the travel bug, taught English as I was traveling, business English, community English, Aikawa English, right? In Japan, did everything, saw the cross section of how English is being taught all over the world for the most part. And then moved to New York, taught English there, moved to Boston, taught English there. And then I said, hey, I don't want to work for anyone. I don't see a lot of opportunity in ESL as an employee, as an employee of a school. I just don't see it. I don't see benefits. I don't see full-time work. Probably it's out there, but I couldn't find it. And I also had an entrepreneurial spirit. So at that time, that was 2013. And that was the time that podcasting was starting to, it was still quite nerdy. It was still something that no one knew what it was. No one, it was a very niche thing. And I started the podcast with another ESL teacher, and we started it and got it going. It just took off. And then the business was built around the podcast.
Okay. So you started teaching English to New Yorkers. Was that the locals? Because I was just talking about this the other day. One of my favorite TV shows but it's still out there. I don't think it's on Netflix, is NYPD Blue ran from maybe for about 15, 16 years, wasn't it? But
yeah.
I found NYPD Blue very difficult to understand. I mean, there was the noises, the garbled dialogue, but also how they talked. And it's this police lingo. Do you like him for that? It's like, do you think he's guilty?
You like him for that. Right. And I'm sure you got a little bit of the New York accent in there too, right, Philip? You must have gotten that with those kinds of shows. They put real New Yorkers in there. Absolutely. That would have been a challenge for sure for anyone to understand that show.
What do you think outsiders would find difficult to understand in New York?
Oh my gosh. I think more than the language. Yes, the language would be hard, but when you're in Manhattan, honestly, everyone is from everywhere. So you do hear that Queens, Brooklyn accent, but you also hear that mixed in with a Middle Eastern accent and, Australian accent. And, that's the beauty of New York. I love it. But the hardest thing is probably the culture. Everyone is there with a dream, as they say. People are just driven like anything, which was good for me. It made sense, but it's not for everyone. So I think keeping up, most people have a few jobs in New York, a few part-time jobs, or maybe a full-time job, a part-time job. They're hustling. That is New York City, or it has been historically. So if you don't love that, it's not for you. It's not for everyone. But if you love it, if you have kind of a dream, it's a fantastic place to be.
And then you went to Boston. How does Boston compare? Is it a sleepy backwater in comparison to New York? Or
Let me tell you, Philip or Phil, what do you go by?
Either is okay.
Okay. Well, I could tell you that the hardest game of trivia I've ever played was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because it is like where the smart people are. I mean, it's right between Harvard and MIT is where I lived. So it doesn't get harder than that, right? So it's basically a community of students. It's a very young city. It was I was doing my master's program. So it was a fun place to be when you are studying. You might as well study in Boston. So I liked it. I thought it was great. It was nice as I was getting into my 30s to leave New York, do something else, be in a slightly slower place, where I could breathe a little bit.
I'll try and do the Boston accent. We're like khakis. Is that right?
My khakis. Yeah. Oh, it is so much fun to try to do that accent. I've actually had some people on my podcast to try to demonstrate that accent. It's great.
Yeah, it's not so difficult to do. I think it has a certain, it's accessible. I think.
Yeah,
I can't do a lot of accents. Yeah, just drop the R's.
I mean, you pretty much got it there. Khakis, right? You're not saying the pants. You're saying you need your keys to start your car. So,
so that was that, and then so I don't really know where to start, Lindsay, about your entrepreneurial journey, but you started first with the podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So All Ears English grew around the podcast. It just, when we launched at that time, I think what we created was really unique and still is, to be honest, different from the way ESL was being taught. ESL was being taught in a very stiff way, in a very formal way, but we were willing to just have fun, just laugh on the show, actually make mistakes as native speakers and talk about those mistakes, right? We just had a good time. And I think it drew people in. That was the key.
Okay. So what I found, actually, I had a chat with a former student of mine on Sunday, and I think I was quoting another friend of mine, actually, who sadly died about a year or two ago, was Jim Baker, who's a very well-known chemistry teacher. You probably see a lot of his stuff online and his obituary as well in The Guardian. But I remember Jim telling me a number of years ago when I met him, just once, unfortunately, but he said that students will forgive anything, but not being bored.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. I mean, we're not teaching kids here, right? We're teaching adults. And so that's why we call our show edutainment, right? It's like I want to entertain them as much as I want to educate them. That's just as important. So it's not about dumping all this information on them about grammar. It's about giving them the full context, making them laugh. Of course, they learn the grammar, they learn the vocabulary, but the point is, like, can you enjoy learning English? Can this be your entertainment and your education?
Yeah, exactly. And what my student said as well, when we were having this chat, he said that, his experience of going to Eikaiwa and in school was, the problem was a lot of the materials were super boring. He said, with the exception maybe, and not plugging one company over another, but a lot of, let's say, TED Talk English, for example, was interesting, or National Geographic books. He found it from his point of view. But other than that, he said the books are just super boring.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I taught at an Eikaiwa, like I said, in Japan, and they have a certain formula and they're working on making it more, bringing it to life, or they were at that time. But yeah, I don't know why textbooks historically have been so boring. And so we're trying to fight that.
So you're trying to fight that. So you have a Genki podcast. You want to more relatable. You want to show, as a la mode at the moment is the vulnerability thing with the whole Brene Brown, isn't it? To show that you get up there and that we're native speakers or, teachers of English, and we too make mistakes. So it's okay for you to do the same.
Yeah, I would say, and just make it about, what we do. This isn't necessarily what everyone should do. I'm just saying this is what we've found works for us because it fits with our character. We make it about more than the English, about more than the mistakes. There's something bigger to this, right? This is, how can we live a better life? So the people that listen to our show tend to be interested in improving their life on a larger scale, personal development, just like living a good life and being happy. And what does that mean? Like looking at things a little bit deeper. but that's partly my value, like my view on the world. So I think the whole vulnerability thing is more about putting your personality into your show, and then whoever listens will connect with that because they see the world in a similar way.
Yeah, and my problem about the vulnerability thing, and maybe it's run its course, or it's gone through a different incarnations. First it was a great idea, and of course she did borrow. She didn't make it herself. I mean, she brought it together from a lot of different sources, but she presented it well. But I feel that a lot of the vulnerability thing is a bit self-indulgent now, isn't it?
It can be. It can be. And I mean, I think Brene Brown is great. She took a lot of risks because what I know about her, she was a researcher from University of Texas, and she was one of the first academics that was willing and able to go up there and talk about this stuff on the stage, right? That took a lot of courage, and I respect her a lot. Absolutely. But sometimes vulnerability in other shows and other hosts I know what you're saying. It can get a little self-indulgent. We have to keep our eye on our listener. If it's a podcast, our viewer, if it's YouTube, it's all about them, but it can also be about us at the same time. So it's, again, finding that really interesting balance.
Yeah, exactly. It reminds me a little bit of, if you know the journalist John Ronson, he's written a lot. Mm-hmm. I think he's done a number of documentaries as well. He's been on Joe Rogan, and I think he's kind of similar to Louis Theroux. Actually, I think he's a bit envious of Louis Theroux. Louis Theroux kind of took over from him in the early noughties. But in one of his books, I can't remember, I've read a few of his, one was, Are You Being Shamed? I think it's about, social media shaming, and it talks about that. But the other book, he talks about a thing called radical honesty groups. I'm not sure if you're aware of radical honesty groups.
Interesting.
But yeah, he said that, he went along and people just, they let go, and they really, so every secret in their life, they talk about, okay? But what happens is, he said, he's not too sure if it's real. So one person said, I murdered somebody. And then somebody says, I murdered somebody in a different way. And then he's saying, actually, no, none of this actually really happened at all.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe that's it would maybe be a good, for listeners, there'd be a good topic maybe for a class sometime, radical honesty. And, maybe something out of the ordinary. Yeah, who knows?
I think our listeners, our students, our ESL students, wherever we're teaching, they want this. They want material that speaks to them like adults with full minds, full lives, families, friends, thoughts. They don't necessarily just want the textbook that cuts out the rest of their lives, because it cuts out who they are as people. That's what we found, at least. So.
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to kind of move on to the podcasting, because maybe for some of the listeners here, they don't really know where to start. So I've had this podcast for about a year now, and been, as I said, about up to 40 episodes. And I don't know if I'm getting any better, but I'm not as bad as I was at the beginning. I'll put it that way. And you kind of get into the gear, you get into the flow of it, and it becomes a lot easier, and you don't make the same mistakes as before. But one thing, when I join podcasting groups, let's say on LinkedIn or Facebook, when people are first starting out, they're obsessed by the equipment, aren't they? It's almost as if they don't want to dive in as such. So they're like, should I buy a Shure mic? Should I buy AT2020? Should I buy a condenser mic? What kind of software should I use? And they don't really do anything. It's a procrastination, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredible. I love that you said that. I think when we're a little bit afraid to do something, we can find anything, not just equipment, but really maybe it's the editing, right? Maybe it's, I haven't learned how to be a perfect editor yet, and I have to edit my show myself, which I think is insane. We don't edit our own show. They find anything to stop them. So it really does come down to turn that mic on, give yourself a deadline, make yourself publish X number of episodes by X date, and then you iterate from there. Because we have 1,900 episodes now. If I listen back to episode 1, it's going to be terrible. Of course it is. And you have to know that it's always going to sound terrible, but you just get over it. You can't get to episode 40 or 1900 unless you have episode 1. So
yeah, get the, as they say, the journey of 1,000 miles, etc., etc. So make the start, make the leap, and get your equipment. We're not going to talk about the equipment here. So just get your editing, whatever editing. Get Audacity or GarageBand, if you're American. I don't know. GarageBand, or Audacity. Use that one. Get a condenser mic. $50, $100. Get that. Get your audio interface, and use Zoom or use some other, other platform, and that's it. And go.
Yes, exactly. It's really, really simple. I mean, the technology is good enough. I say you don't have to spend more than $150 to get the tech you need. Probably less than 100. Then you've got it, and then just go. It's just you and your microphone and your co-host if you have one, right? So totally agree with you.
Okay, so once you get going, the problem is to get traction, isn't it? So you start out and you become, like when I started with the website as well, you become obsessed by the viewership, listenership, visitors, traffic, whatever you call it. And you're like, okay, I only got some money for that. I'm getting a little bit more for that. Oh, it's gone down this week. But cumulatively, I'm doing quite well. What's going wrong here? So it's not always what we would say straight off the launch pad, is it? It does take a little bit of time.
Yeah. And there are specific things you can do. I mean, we could talk about those. Maybe we won't go into those today. There are things you can do to grow your show, of course, but I think the biggest thing is just consistency. If you tell your listeners you're going to show up for them, you better show up for them, right? Because pod fade is real. I know so many podcasts that have just faded away because they get excited. They realize it's actually pretty hard. Podcasting is hard. It's not easy to keep this thing going. So once you commit to your audience, commit to it, say, I'm going to try this for 3 months, and then I'm going to reevaluate if I want to continue, but get those 3 months done on every single time you say you're going to publish. If it's every Wednesday, it's every Wednesday, right? So that's my recommendation for growing your audience. Just be consistent.
Yeah, and apologies to the listeners. I haven't been doing that over the past few weeks. So from here on, I've changed my ways. I'm totally repentant, and I'll be publishing every Monday.
Everything will change now.
Thank you to my faithful listeners. So yeah, that's how you start out. So usually we use a podcast host. Do you recommend SoundCloud, YouTube, these channels as well?
So I wouldn't recommend either of those for your primary RSS feed host. So I still recommend Libsyn because you need a place to host your RSS feed. YouTube is great if you want to record, if we have the video on now, you might put that on YouTube, right? But that's video. If you're doing just audio, I recommend Libsyn for beginners, for anyone getting started. I think you can start at like $20 a month. It's very cheap. And then when you get into monetizing your show, we could talk about that later. There are other more enterprise level platforms that make sense when you want to do monetization. But starting on Libsyn is great. Libsyn, and then, that's what I would recommend is Libsyn. That's where I have my experience. So that's the one I can recommend.
Okay. And there are some free hosts as well, but they insert their own ads into your podcast, don't they?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I don't know if I would want that. Libsyn's been around for a long time. You can do your research about the other ones. There's other stuff. I think there's Simplecast. There's a lot of others, but make sure you get one that's been around a long time and follows the IAB guidelines. So then your stats make sense. Your stats are being counted in a way that's legitimate. But yeah, just don't obsess over it too much. Just find a legitimate RSS feed host and then go from there.
Okay. So just go from there. You have you have your equipment, you have your host, and you put your podcast together. And how do you know who your audience is? You asked me before this podcast who my audience was, and maybe who the audience I think are and who they actually are different. I'm not sure. So who your audience are is they call customer avatar, isn't it? And you cater to that, you grow the audience.
Sure.
And it's happy days after that. Is it? So tell me the joys and the travails of.
Yeah. I certainly don't want to make it sound so easy and easy breezy because it's not. I mean, don't get me wrong. We work like crazy. We work incredibly hard. And so it's not easy, but there are certain things you can do. I mean, obviously early on, I would survey once you're getting, let's say around 200, 250, 300 downloads per episode, go ahead and survey your audience, right? That's the oldest trick in the book. We do this every couple of years. And for a while in the very beginning, we had an automatic survey going out after they opted in for a lead magnet. So it'd be, hey, get our most common XYZ. They opt in and then we redirect them to a survey. We ask them to fill out the survey. And then last year we surveyed our customers to understand our typical buyer. So you can run all sorts of different surveys and you can understand what else are they listening to. That's a great option for guest promos or to be a guest on their other shows. You can understand their age, their income level, whatever you want to ask, what you need. So you get a better picture of your audience. But you also should know going into it, I'm sure your listeners have experience teaching, so they probably have some idea of who they want to target. So again, it's a little bit of both. It's like you have some idea and they say, oh, is this really who I'm reaching? This is who I think I would reach. And then you get closer and closer to that ideal listener.
Okay. So it's kind of honing down each time.
Yeah. Each time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you're building the audience. So so let's talk about numbers here. So you said when you get to like 200 downloads per episode, that's pretty modest, I think.
Yeah.
That's achievable. I don't know. I mean, I'm achieving that sometimes with this podcast. Of course, we're all trying to grow them, but
yeah,
that's something that I've achieved. So I think that's modest from my point of view. But so what's the next step from 200? How do you go from 200? So we talked about, scaling the podcast.
Scaling the podcast. Sure. I mean, I think the first step is, why are you starting this podcast? What is your ultimate goal? Are you trying to run a media company eventually where you'll be serving ads, right? Because that would imply different things you're doing versus, are you trying to create an education company where you're going to build courses, or are you doing both? Right? Which is legitimate too. Totally fine. 50-50. Or is it something else? Are you looking just to get lessons like students, one-on-one students, as opposed to the downloadable course or the self-guided course? So figure out what you're doing first, and that would determine what the next step is. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So figure out where you're going, your next step, and then monetizing. So that was a nice segue there. How do you make money from podcasts? A lot of people struggle. This on the forums and the Facebook groups, people say, how can I make money from this? Partnerships, affiliates, your own courses.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of options. Just decide on one thing that you feel like makes sense that you can do, on a regular basis. What we did was, this was 2013, so it's a different time. We started by selling our transcripts. That was the most obvious thing. We had listeners. They wanted transcripts. We sold our transcripts. We still sell our transcripts. So we had a recurring subscription model for that. And then we eventually built an app to provide those transcriptions in a real-time format. But that was down the line. So we started our first year selling transcripts. Then we went into a sponsorship, worked with a couple of sponsors in a more long-term format for multiple years. And then we built our first course in 2015. So about 2 years in, we built our first course. I hired someone who was and here's where it comes to team building, right? You can't do everything yourself. We hired an expert in IELTS. She had been an examiner for 14 years. And as soon as I hired her, I said, we are building an IELTS course right now. And so we did that. It took us about 4 months, launched the course, and then we started building out other courses to go along with that. So there's so many things you could do. Just decide on one thing that seems to make the most sense based on your surveys and go for that. Just try not to get too scattered, right?
That's the problem, isn't it? It's so you had the audience and you decided on IELTS. So why did you decide on IELTS, not TOEFL, TOEIC, Cambridge exams?
Yeah, we were kind of playing around with TOEIC. A lot of it was about finding the right team member to hire. And I knew that she was good, and I knew she was smart, and I knew she could build other things for me. And her expertise was in IELTS. Originally, we were going to have her go and learn TOEFL, because my immediate thought was TOEFL. I didn't know much about IELTS. I just didn't know. And then when I did the research and I looked at the trajectory of IELTS versus TOEFL, long-term trajectory, and how big IELTS is compared to TOEFL. TOEFL, as far as I know, is just in the US. And then IELTS is worldwide. This is a worldwide exam. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with IELTS in the next few years, honestly, with Duolingo coming in and, immigration, we're not sure what's happening. But for me, IELTS was the winner because of who I hired and the trajectory of the exam at that time and how just the sheer number of people taking IELTS. So that was the winner.
Okay. And did it meet your expectations? Were you happy with?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that, you don't know what to expect, right? So I bought a course. I bought a course on how to build online courses. Online courses were hot at that time. They're even hotter now. They're almost too hot right now. Everyone's building an online course. And I followed that step by step, just did everything he told me to do in the course. And we launched it. I think we got like 6 students our first day, and I didn't know what to expect. So I was like, I guess that's good. And then I think we ended up getting like a few students a month for the first few months. So it was pretty slow in the beginning, I would say. And then we had inflection points where something changed. We had put out a new lead magnet, or we came up with a new funnel, or had a great student on the show. We interview our successful students. We launched another podcast too. That's the other thing we did. I don't know if this is too much information.
No, absolutely. I'm okay, writing it down myself here. Okay. So yeah.
All right. Yeah. Go ahead, so I guess I would just say, if you're going to launch a product, like an online course, make sure you have a marketing channel for it. And it could be you want to make sure you're starting to warm up your audience, because this launch is coming. And all of a sudden, if they're like, oh, they made an IELTS course, I've never heard anything about IELTS, that doesn't make any sense, right? You haven't built your credibility in their eyes yet. So what we did was, I knew we were going to be launching an IELTS course in May of 2015. We built our IELTS Energy podcast. I think we launched it in the winter of that year, like 3 months before. So we already had a lead list. We already had listeners. They were excited. They had gotten like opted in for checklists, and they were ready. And so the buyers came from the list more than the podcast, right? So that was kind of all planned ahead of time. I would never just launch something and not know how I was going to market it.
Yeah, exactly. It's about getting the funnel. It's about the customer journey. It's about nurturing them and get them to like you and
yes, trust you, right? They have to know that they have a lot of options. They have way more than they did back then now, right? But they have a lot of options. And so they have to know that you are credible. And we are very credible in IELTS. And so we had to get that across. But you can have all the credibility in the world. If you don't communicate it well, then you lose, right? So that's the other thing. We have to learn how to communicate our credibility and how well we know our subject matter.
Okay. And for people, you started out, you had your initial 6 signups. So how many people did you have on your listenership at that time? So people would get an idea, because sometimes people have, large audiences, they market it, it doesn't work out like this. I mean, 6 is better than nothing, but people can become a bit discouraged. So for people at this point, as you say, you have to pivot, have inflection points, and change your marketing. Yeah, go back to the beginning of the customer experience. Yeah.
It's a good question. Honestly, Phil, I don't remember how many people are on the list. Was many lists ago, right? This was like years ago, 2015. So I don't remember, but I want to say more than 500, I think. I think there was probably close to 1,000.
Okay.
Yeah, on the list, I think. But I could be wrong. I couldn't even go back and check because I don't have the list anymore. But it wasn't, 10 people on the list. So we didn't have a 60% conversion rate from the list.
You would have no problems then, would you? If you had 60% conversion rates, things would be going great. But yeah, so it's a little bit like if you've ever read that book by Chet Holmes, the Sales Machine. It's
that one I haven't read.
Definitely recommend it. I'll put it in the show notes for everybody. But he talks about strategic versus tactical. that some people are, most salespeople, and I know this coming from a sales background, they're tactical, as in, hit the call, you want to buy this now, it'll be good for your company, but they don't nurture it. There's not, ecosystem. There's not they don't actually get to where the customer is coming from, as in their pain points. They don't give the customer, something like a webinar or free book or, attendance at a conference, something like that the customer might actually want, some really good free information, which is really what you were providing, wasn't it? Really great free information, no obligation, but if you should so want to study IELTS, well, we've given all this to you, and then you come to the tactical part, which is sign here, please, or would you like to have that today? The classical closing technique, isn't it? So so you have to nurture the client, but you also have to close them as well, don't you?
Yeah, and this is something that we're still honing. I mean, because we put out a lot of really, really good free content, and in some ways that can hurt you more than help you if you're not careful, because you have to find a way to make it clear the differences between the course and the podcast, or the course and the YouTube video. Like, they could be out there online for free in the wild, wild west of YouTube. They're not going to pass the exam because they don't have a system. They don't have an order to what they're learning. All the strategies don't make sense with each other. You can't combine them, all these strategies from different teachers. So they do need a course, but how do you show them that? Like, how do you build the gap in their head? That's kind of an art. How do you talk about this as a system? This is step by step. We'll show you how to plan your day, your study planner, all these things that make it clear that they can't just sit on YouTube and consume free videos, right? It's challenging, especially in this world of ESL.
And if you want to learn, please do sign up for Lindsay's newsletter. Is that right?
You could sign up for my newsletter. We have we don't have one main newsletter. We have a lot of different funnels, actually. What they could do is they could take our quiz. Right now, what's working well for us is an English quiz, a couple of quizzes. So we run a quiz. It's at allearsenglish.com/fluency score. And we run them through this quiz. We assign them a particular fluency level, and that is their starting point. And then eventually they're invited through a webinar at some point into the course. So that's kind of our newsletter, quote unquote, but we don't do newsletters, just general newsletters anymore. So.
Okay. So what I was kind of pointing out, if people want pointers as to how to market, as in copy, is not just yours, Lindsay, but look at similar courses, what other people are doing, what the bigger companies are doing, and look at the emails, look at the copy, and just borrow if it's successful, of course. You just
observe. Yeah, there's a lot of observing you can do for sure. And also, meeting other people in this field. I mean, I'm involved in a couple of mastermind groups with YouTubers, with other podcasters, and also people outside of ESL that I meet with. And it sounds like you have a mastermind group too. I don't know where I'd be without these people, like sitting down once a month, once every 2 weeks. Hey, what's working for you? What's not working? Let me get an idea from this totally different field, totally unrelated industry, and apply it to my industry. You need that.
And that's a nice segue to the EFL Magazine Business Mastermind, which we're running at the moment. And we're delighted on cue to welcome Aurelia McNeil, who's a member of the mastermind group. Good morning, good evening, Aurelia. How are you?
Oh, doing pretty good. How is everyone?
Very good. And,
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Same here.
Well, Aurelia, I know you. I don't have to say that. But what I was going to say, Aurelia, apologies for the short notice and thanks for hopping on. I came up with the idea actually last night. I sent Lindsay an email saying, could I bring one of the mastermind members on? And Lindsay was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And I I sent you a message this morning, and I think, Aurelia, you said, "Who's this?" I think because I think we're connected on WhatsApp in the group, but not individually. So
Right.
you were like, "Who's this person emailing me all this or sending me all these messages?" But I'd just like to introduce Lindsay. She has. She's the founder of All Ears English, and she has a podcast, which we've just talked about over the past, 20, 25 minutes. And she has 5 million listeners a month. Is that right, Lindsay?
We have about 5 million downloads per month. So downloads is not the same as listeners, just to be clear. In podcasting, it's a little bit different. But yeah, we have a very large podcast. Absolutely. Nice to meet you, Aurelia.
Yeah, same here.
And I just, sorry, Aurelia, I just want to say one more thing, that Lindsay also has a course, IELTS course, and Aurelia is a TOEFL and MAT teacher. Is that right, Aurelia? Did I?
Yeah. TOEFL and generally academic English, actually.
Awesome.
Yes.
And Aurelia is looking to grow her business, of course, more students, customers. So Aurelia, do you have any questions for Lindsay?
Well, I did look on your website, and I was in the short time that I could, and I was very impressed. I did see the downloads, and also you have a team of about 4 or 5 teachers that are working for you, working with you.
Yes, absolutely. The team is so important for sure.
Okay. Now, you mentioned about mastermind groups. Do you have any that you can recommend that?
Yeah. So, one group that I'm in now is called the Creator Smarts Mastermind Group. That's one of the ones that I've been in for the last couple of years. I also joined a few years ago a group called the Dynamite Circle. And that is a large group, a forum of location independent or digital nomads. I mean, I'm not a nomad. I live in Denver, but it's the same mentality. You're running a business online and you're free, basically location independent. And so they do set up masterminds for you 3 times a year, twice a year. If you want a mastermind, you opt in and they'll set it up for you. So those are 2 of the places where I've found mine.
Okay.
We'll put a link in, Lindsay, if you would be so kind as to send me the links for those, and we'll put them in the show notes as well. And of course, we're building also the EFL Magazine Business Mastermind from the podcast. So if anybody has any questions about joining, and we also have an upcoming conference, so I'll talk about that more over the next couple of weeks. So you mentioned also, Lindsay, about team building. So you initially was it 2 people? Is that right, or just you?
No. So initially I had a co-founder, and my co-founder moved on after a year. And then at that point I had to decide, was All Ears English going to continue, or was I going to move on to? And in my gut, in my heart, I felt that there was something special here. I don't know how to describe that, but when you have it, it's just something there. We had traction growing, and there was something deeply special about this brand to me. So I went ahead and I hired 2 new people, and they were both potential co-hosts. One of them ended up being my main co-host on All Ears English, who's Michelle Kaplan. And she's still with me after 7 years. So 7 years of podcasting later, we're still going strong. Very, very grateful. And then Jessica Beck is my IELTS expert, and she's still with me as well. So she is the co-host on the other podcast. Then later we hired a 3rd teacher, Aubrey Carter, and she was trained under Jessica. So she's been able to learn a lot of the IELTS material from Jessica, and those 2 do that podcast together. And Michelle and I are on the bigger show, All Ears English. So yeah. And
I just run through the list here for the past few minutes, because it was fascinating. I was lost, you could say, in what you were saying. You gave away a lot of valuable information for people running podcasts, and I think I'm going to have to rewind this and replay it myself. So for people listening in, thank you to Lindsay on behalf for imparting all this really great information for somebody who wants to build a podcast. And No excuses. Just go in there and do it and scale it. Know who your customers are. Know what you're offering. Don't be confused about your message or your products and services. Pick it and go with it. Would you say that would be the right way to proceed?
Yeah, exactly. I'd say, if you are interested in podcasting, give it a good chance, be consistent, tell your audience when you're going to publish. Make sure you go ahead and do that and give yourself a timeline. Is it 6 months? Is it 1 year? And then you're going to make a decision. Is this working for you? Do you actually love it? Because I love the microphone. I don't love video. So that's the other thing. Like sometimes we have to find a medium that makes sense for us. So be honest with yourself. Do you love being in front of the video? Then YouTube is for you. Right? Not podcasting. Do you love being in front of the mic? Then it's podcasting. Do you love writing? Maybe it's blogging. Right? So it's not the same. It's not that we should all be doing these things. I think we need to pick one channel in the beginning that really resonates.
Okay. So it's what you like to do as well. And, pick a number of channels and I'm just looking at Aurelia's message here in the chat. How does podcasting compare to other forms of advertising?
Yeah. So you mean Aurelia, just explain to me your question a little bit more. Do you mean in terms of like when you are taking ads on your show, or do you mean in terms of selling your own stuff?
You kind of answered it a little bit already, but I was just wanting to know, have you done other forms of advertising, and have you found podcasting to be quicker, or if it's more stable, or?
Yeah, I would say if I had to say it in one word, it's deeper. It's deeper because it's more intimate. I would even argue it's more intimate than video. Now, my YouTube friends would argue the opposite. They don't know the video is the best. They have their own arguments, but I think that there's something very, very unique when you are literally in someone's ears. It's a very intimate connection you have with your listener, which, they're not, on YouTube, videos are being served up for you all the time. Distractions, right? On the right side bar next to your video. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen, at least right now in most podcast apps. If you're in that podcast, you're in there because you want to be, you love the host. So it's deeper. It's more intimate.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, if you have YouTube Premium, you can listen to YouTube videos on the go. But not everybody has that. Mm-hmm. Other people have Spotify, Apple Music. But generally, for me, I like going out for a walk, especially in nice springtime, or commuting.
Yeah,
you like to listen, don't you? You don't like to. Yeah. You have to sit down and watch, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, also the thing is, these two platforms are going to start blending more and more. I'm pretty sure that very soon, podcasting is going to have a bigger presence on YouTube, and so we're going to see them start to blend more. Podcasts are currently getting discovered on YouTube for sure. So don't get me wrong, but I think it's important to know what is the medium where you shine, where your voice really shines, and start with that. Go heavier with that at the beginning. Yeah, as I said before. But yeah, I think that's the biggest difference. Is it's deeper. It's a more intimate connection. Users are less distracted, and therefore you can build a very long-term relationship. We have listeners who've been listening to All Ears English for 5 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. And a shout out to my listeners as well. I sometimes get messages and emails of encouragement, and thank you very much. That's also part of it. It's not just the monetary reward, is it, Lindsay? It's the feedback, isn't it?
Oh my gosh. I swear, if we weren't, if this wasn't part of a business, we would keep going with All Ears English. I actually love it. Like, I want to be podcasting. So if one day we decide that this is just going to be a hobby and we're just going to do something else, we'd probably keep going. It's genuinely fun, and getting those emails is amazing.
So there you go, Aurelia. Is that something you think you'd be interested in?
Well, she has my interest peaked. Definitely.
Yeah, I think Lindsay has that sort of infectious enthusiasm that we all feel energized when we come away and want to do things. Maybe we should listen to this podcast every day in the morning. But yeah, that's testament to how and why your podcast is is so successful, isn't it? Because, you know, you have this infectious enthusiasm. You love what you're doing. It's very similar to Jamie Keddy, who I interviewed last week, and he has lessonstream.com.org. And, you know, when he talked about what he does, the actual courses, the videos, the worksheets, he's so animated, you know, he can't hide it. It's not something you can fake.
That's
you
amazing.
just love it.
Yeah, it's a gift, right? To find that thing, right? And I feel like we should keep going. Like we should try to find that thing, whatever it is, that kind of makes us come alive. Such a cliche, but it's true.
It's the whole ikigai thing, isn't it? To have here, you know, where the money and your beliefs and your enthusiasm, you know, intersect, isn't it? That's
absolutely
that's what we've got to look at. So, what's for the future? You're unhappy with 5 million downloads, so you want to scale from there. Is that it, Lindsay?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I want All Ears English to become a worldwide global brand that people know about, that essentially changes the way the world learns English. Our slogan is connection, not perfection. And that is our value. And I want more people to understand what that really means. It means that, you know, instead of getting so lost in our perfectionism, our mistakes, what if we could just move past that and connect with the human being in front of us, right? So that's what I want all English learners to be able to do. So absolutely, I feel like we're on a mission to make sure more people know about All Ears English and can focus on connection, not perfection. So absolutely, I would like All Ears English to be on the radio someday. I would like to have a radio channel for All Ears English. That's a big dream. And we're going to continue to build out our courses, build out our 2 podcasts, possibly launch another one. I'm also starting to do some more mentoring in this area of helping people start their own podcasts. So that's also down the road in the future, or imminently happening.
Okay, imminently. Okay. So I just maybe going back a little bit, but a little bit more about the podcasting itself. So you had one podcast, now you have 2 podcasts, and you want another podcast. So I know that Pat Flynn, for example, who's a well-known online marketer, isn't he, and podcaster,
yes.
and he has maybe 2, 3. I can't remember how many podcasts.
Yeah, I think now. He has a handful of them,
doesn't he? Yeah. And so for somebody who has one podcast, what are the advantages of having more podcasts? Why do that?
Well, I think that it just, again, it comes back to understanding what your goal is. Why are you starting this? Now in the podcasting world, networks are a big deal. So having a network where the podcasts are linked and connected and each one is promoting the other one. And so we can rise all ships, right, at the same time together. So they come up together. If you want to focus on something more specific, I think that this world's getting a lot bigger, more competitive. So the more specific you can be in what you're teaching, the better. Right. And so it's yet to be determined what this podcast will be and whether we'll launch this, but certainly we love podcasting. So why not keep going with it?
And one tip for podcasting is to do what I didn't do, is to name the guests all the way through and name and give a shout out to the URL, which I didn't do. I'm very sorry about that, Lindsay. So we just did it at the beginning and now we're doing it near the end. So Lindsay, can you give me your URL and all your businesses again?
Sure. So if you want to find All Ears English, it's just at allearsenglish.com. That's where you can learn about our brand, what we do. And then if anyone is interested in mentoring, you know, like I said, I'm doing some very informal mentoring right now to especially educators, not just ESL, but anyone who is basically an educator and wants to start a podcast of their own. They can email me at lindsay@allearsenglish.com. And that's Lindsay with an AY. So I'm working with a couple people now, very informally, but excited to get them going with their shows. You know, taking the dream and making it real is the thing that I get excited about.
Fantastic. And I think we connected also on LinkedIn. So Lindsay, you're on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the usual?
Yes. Mm-hmm. All those things. We're pretty much on all of them. So I personally am on LinkedIn. So if people want to connect with me directly there, All Ears English is on there too. So however you want to engage with us, but definitely check out the podcast. If you like it, recommend it to your students. Many of your listeners are probably looking for material to assign for homework. That's the other piece. And All Ears English, each episode is 15 minutes. It's super easy to assign them an episode and then use that as the teaching material. It's all right there for you. So
great. So there's so much to go through. When I listen to this again and do a little bit of editing, I'll pick up all those nuggets, and we'll take some excerpts as well and release them on social media. Aurelia, before we go, did you have any other questions for Lindsay?
Yes. Can you type your last, just your full name in the chat so I can find you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'll just type my name and then the company name. So Lindsay McMahon, All Ears English. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Great.
Absolutely.
So there we go. Lindsay, thanks again.
This has been really fun, Philip. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been very inspiring, and I think it's great what you're doing here, getting teachers together and, helping them to really, move into this next era of online teaching and freedom, right? Personal freedom that teachers can start to build their own thing. I love that. It's fantastic. So thanks for your work.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.